done. Let's go. Let's start. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Đukanović. I work as an expert and a consultant, and I'm member of the board of the IDM, the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. I'm happy to welcome you here today. It's the first live discussion since March, and it certainly makes a difference to us all. Although I must add that the team of the IDM has made a marvelous job in organizing in a very short time online events and publications. Congratulations and thank you. Let me add that this event is being recorded and will also be available online. As you may know, the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe specifically addresses current questions of the region since Erhard Busek took over the chairmanship in 1995. This is 25 years ago. Since then, the Institute works toward a better comprehension of and cooperation with the region. The European Union itself has for a long time now recognized the importance of stability, development, democracy and peace in the region and the Balkans for Europe as a whole. Johannes Hahn, when he was regional commissioner, provided help, promoted assistance to EU members, associated countries and candidate countries in the region. However, the Union, mainly occupied by the financial crisis and Brexit, has neglected this part of Europe for many years now, and the consequences that can be seen today are alarming to say the least. Everybody wants back to normal today, but let us hope not. Not in these countries, not to that kind of normal, because this normal is not what the IDM has been working for and working for. In this context, the IDM, with their partners, the Politische Akademie of the People's Party and the Karl-Renner-Institut, has organized a series of events, panel discussions about parliamentary elections in the region, starting with Slovakia, North Macedonia, Croatia, and today, Montenegro. Sebastian Schäfer, Managing Director of the IDM, will give you an introductory overview of the situation in Montenegro in a few instants, but let me first introduce the partners of today's panel. Let me add that I'm very glad to see two women here as partners. This is not often the case in the region, and I'm very happy that the IDM is bringing such experts here today. Jovana Marovic, Executive Director of Politikom Network in Podgorica, and Milena Bežić, Director of the Center of Democracy and Human Rights. Last but not least, our moderator today is Michael Stellwak, Political Advisor at Multilateral Dialogue of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Vienna. Welcome. Let me wish an interesting morning, and Sebastian, please, will you take over?
Thank you, Daniela, very much for the support that you give the IDM of being a board member. We have been cooperated before you became a board member, and I'm very much looking forward to deepen and expand our cooperation. Very warm welcome, of course, also to everyone who is here in the Presseclub Concordia and to the colleagues from Montenegro. It's a great pleasure that we have the possibility to be standing here today and have this sort of hybrid event. The last event Daniela mentioned, we had a series of these parliamentary elections that we accompany with expertise from the side of the IDM with our two partners, the Karl-Renner-Institut and the Politische Akademie. The last physical one was on the 19th of February. All the others have been online, and everything else that we have done in the meantime since March has been online. And now I'm very happy that I can see at least, not faces, because everyone in the audience is wearing masks, but at least physical people here, and I'm very much looking forward to discuss with you the situation in Montenegro. As we know, there's going to be an election on Sunday. We have prepared a briefing that is provided to everyone who is in the room printed out, and I will be summing up the main points. Now, I've been writing academically and especially also within the framework of IDM since years and years, and it's, for me, often not a very pleasurable experience to gather the data and bring the information together, but I'm always very happy when the final result is there. That also counts for the publication for the Jahrbuch der Europäischen Integration that I have been writing since 2012, the contribution about Montenegro. Now, when I write about Montenegro in the past couple of years, it was quite easy because there's not much change that is happening in the political arena. And this is something that is characterizing the situation in Montenegro. We have Milo Đukanović, who has been either prime minister or president, or for a brief period of time simply the president of the party. But nevertheless, he is the dominating figure of the past 30 years in the country, and he's only 55. So he can continue to be important. And without him, not much is functioning in the country. The country itself, since its independence, has been under Đukanović, and especially with the Democrat Party of Socialists in Montenegro that have been ruling the country since 1991, given a lot of work into integration into the transatlantic community. Montenegro became a member of NATO in 2017. Montenegro, as of now, has opened all chapters for negotiating to becoming an EU member. There's a lot of progress in that field, and you can characterize Montenegro as the front runner when it comes to European integration. But one thing that we have to mention here is it's easy to be a front runner when the competition is not very strong. And despite all the things that Montenegro has achieved, there are lacks, especially when it comes to the freedom of media. There is a lot of problems when it comes to trafficking drugs, trafficking humans, organized crime. There's a lot of clientelism that is happening in the country. And the developments in the recent years, especially in the political arena, with a very split opposition, has been very, very complicated. During the last parliamentary election, there were rumors that there had been staged a coup, where the opposition claims that this was simply a facade to get the DPS re-elected. Nevertheless, there have been trials, there have been people convicted in absence, and this has been poisoning the political landscape in Montenegro for the past 4 years. Some of the opposition parties did not participate in the sessions in parliament. This is, of course, very challenging for the democratic development of the country. When we look at the opposition and when we look at the several challenges that we are facing when it comes to Montenegro for the upcoming election, we can see that, and I'm making a bold claim, and I'm hoping that we can discuss all the points that I've mentioned, especially with our two experts from Montenegro later on, that the strongest opposition at the moment has been the church. And why? Because the ruling party has, in December, adopted a law that would have to require, especially the Serbian Orthodox Church, to prove that they have owned properties even before 1920. And this was seen as an attack on the Serbian Orthodox Church, because there is a new Montenegrin Orthodox Church that has entered the arena. And this has sparked a lot of protests. Now, we all know that these protests had to be shut down due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And nevertheless, these have been reinstated. There have even been priests imprisoned due to the fact that they violated the restrictions of the right of assembly during the time of Corona. And they have been ongoing in the past weeks and also in the recent days. It's going to be interesting to see if this is actually a factor, because one of the decisive points that we can see is what is missing in Montenegro is a unified opposition that could challenge the ongoing rule of the DPS. Now, we see that I'm originally from Bavaria. There's a party that has been ruling longer than the DPS in that federal state. We also know, when we look at the city of Vienna, that we have a very dominating party. We have also a party in the federal government that has been participating in various forms of coalition governments for a couple of decades. The challenge that we are seeing is, and the difference here especially, is that we have this one dominating figure in the political landscape. So it's not necessarily the problem that one party that would be able to reform themselves, that would be able to bring in new people is in charge, especially when we look at certain political party directions in the opposition that want to have a stronger tie with the Russian Federation, that want to have a stronger independence from the Euro-Atlantic integration, which can, of course, not be in the interest of the European Union. But when you have only one party with one dominant figure and you have the only choice to support them, this is very, very strenuous for a democratic development of a country. Summing up, before we go into further details, when we look at the polls that we can see for Sunday that have been aggregated, we can assume that the DPS is going to win around 40%. And then with one of the party lists, the VF, who would poll half as high with around 20%. We will certainly, I think, discuss challenges that are arising around the possibility of water fraud, the increase of people that are eligible to vote, especially in comparison to the increase of the population, of the population that is eligible to vote in Montenegro. And we will also certainly talk about the challenges that are arising with bringing the diaspora back and trying to influence the outcome of the election in this way. We should probably mention that it is also important that the Albanian minority, especially the parties of the Albanian minority, could not find a conclusion to run together, which means that they are also split, which means that the DPS will most likely be able to pick out a probably needed coalition partner to continue to rule Montenegro for the next 4 years. I'm going to stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to the opinion of our two guests, and I'm handing over to Michael Stellbach, who will be moderating the session here. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. First question, can you hear me? So thank you so much, Mr. Schäfer, for your briefing. I saw already that our experts, Ms. Marovic and Mr. Stesic, already muted their microphone, so thank you so much. It's very good for the audience to hear so. And as Mr. Schäfer correctly said, when he wrote about Montenegro, there is not a lot new, like always the same. So my first question would be, DPS, which is ruling, unchallenged and uninterrupted since 1991, the year where I was born. Is there, Mrs. Besic, is there an opportunity that we have to go into opposition for the first time ever?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't hear you well. Can you repeat your question, please?
After almost 30 years in government, is there a kind of chance that the ruling DPS has to go into opposition after this election? What are your thoughts? And
yes, thank you for your question. Yes, exactly. This would be, let's say, the very, let's say, certain opportunity, at least opportunity, to replace the government and to replace DPS as the ruling party for more than 20, almost 30 years. And this opportunity is, let's say, created in a manner that as you mentioned in your previous explanation, that there's let's say specific political situation in Montenegro. Although we are a front runner when it comes to EU integration process, but also in comparison to other Western Balkan countries. On the other side, internal affairs in Montenegro are going in the direction which simply cannot be estimated without certain strong bond between the political institutions and state institutions and ruling party DPS with their coalition partners in power. You mentioned also this church issue, which is very, let's say, prominent in our public for more than 8 months. And this issue really raised some tensions in our society. So having all this background and all this background in mind, we have some calculations because my organization, Center for Democracy and Human Rights, is regularly conducting opinion poll on political attitudes and of our citizens. So we have slight different figures that the ones that you have mentioned, and this difference between the current ruling coalition and on the other side opposition parties is very tight. So we can talk about possibility to see DPS on opposition side after these elections.
Thank you so much. Ms. Marovic, as head of the political network, you're also dealing with the issue. What are your thoughts for Sunday?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel today. Let's say that even the results 4 years ago were somehow, you know, there was a small difference between the ruling party and the opposition. It was just 1 parliamentary seat. So it was really, really interesting 4 years ago. And there are calculations that the coup and the everything which happened during the election, they actually influenced the results 4 years ago. So at the moment, it's as Milena said, it's really interesting to see how the whole situation regarding the law on religion and the freedom of religion in Montenegro will influence the outcome of the elections. But you know, what is the problem and the issue in Montenegro with the ruling party is that the ruling party is controlling state resources, that actually the results of the public opinion poll, which were published by CEDEM 2 weeks ago, actually influenced the pressure on the voters at the local level, and that now they, you know, they are really active on the ground to secure victory. So that's the first thing. The second thing is actually that what is the OSCE regularly highlighting in their reports, that the ruling party has institutional advantage. So basically, even now they are using, because of the coronavirus and the situation regarding the freedom of assembly and, you know, like the whole campaign and everything, they are using state resources to influence voters and, you know, the visits of the ministers to the local communities and everything. So that's something which is a ruling party using regularly. As you said, the DPS and Milo Đukanović, they are controlling state resources and they are in the power for 30 years. So that's something which is influencing the outcome of the elections, but it will be interesting to see, because the opinion shows that actually the support for the ruling party dropped for 6%. So we will see. It will be interesting what will be, let's say, chances for coalitions after the elections if DPS win just around 40%.
We have an active opposition on the ground, as Mrs. Marovic said, and of course the institutional advantage of government. So when we talk about the opposition, we have also to talk about electoral groups. We have to talk about electoral alliances, for example, for the future. And the other one, peace is our nation. Those alliances are not that old. Can you maybe talk about a little bit about those alliances when we talk about the opposition could win? Who is the opposition?
I think that our two guests from Montenegro are much more better suited to talk about, especially the opposition. But I maybe want to pick up the challenges that opposition, be it new, be it old, and not regarding which political agenda they are facing, what challenges they are having that Joanna had already tackled. And when you look at the institutional advantage of the DPS, and you mentioned, I mean, the OSCE, for instance, has provided a program that could verify the signatures in order to prevent voter fraud. But nevertheless, during the election, software will be used that has been developed even, but at least that will be used by state institutions. And we can see already here that the opposition is regardless of a political agenda and regardless of the challenge that you would have to really find a uniting factor in order to break the long-lasting dominance of the DPS, they will also go up against institutional challenges that are not easy to tackle. And I would say that especially also the circumstances within the pandemic always favors a ruling party by providing stability, be it real or not. It also helps to introduce measures, as I mentioned, against demonstrations. And here it doesn't matter if it is the church, if it is the opposition or whatsoever. When you don't have the possibilities, the regular rules of a democratic elections are rigged in the favor of the ruling party.
Yes, we can also witness this, what you've said in several other states. Government, of course, has one advantage. So I would give back the ball to you, Ms. Marovic, talking about the opposition. What is the agenda? What keeps those alliances together?
Well, they are not together at the moment. You know, political opposition in Montenegro is divided, and it was always been divided. So there are like three main, let's say, courses in the opposition. The first one is the, let's say, the radical pro-Russian and pro-Serbian Democratic Front and coalition around the Democratic Front. They are, let's say, organizers, or they are supporters of the protests organized by the Serbian Orthodox Church. The second one is, as you said, the Democrats. They are trying to put themselves between the radical DF and the DPS. So, but the DPS is usually qualifying them as a nationalist party and as a pro-Serbian party, which is not. And then there is a small groupation around URA, which is a moderate and civic party, and they have a platform black and white, which is listed with the, let's say, NGOs, like prominent members from the NGO sector and many other areas, and trying to push for, let's say, expert government. They will be really important, let's say, factor if the situation will be in accordance with the public opinion polls result, because they want to be member of the government with the opposition and not with the ruling party, and they are around 6%. So this is the situation. The ruling party is trying to present the situation as the attempt to prevent the European path of the country, and as attempt to turn the country back in some, let's say, nationalistic ways or, let's say, scenarios. And then the Democratic Front is trying to also tackle these, identity issues, and trying to explain that the Serbian minority is now, under the pressure, and that the country is really forcing for the Montenegrin identity and the church and everything, which I don't know. The true situation is somewhere between these two scenarios. They are not radical in any way, as these two blocks trying to present.
Mrs. Besic, can you hear us? So we have a split opposition. We have some alliances. What are your thoughts?
Sorry, which result? Sorry.
We were talking about the opposition. We were talking about the black and white list and the two electoral alliances.
Yes.
It is one thing to have particular polls, and it is another thing to win. And it would be a third thing to cooperate and to kind of lead a country. So do you see any chance that the splitted opposition could cooperate more in the future?
So there were during this mandate of previous 4 years, there were also attempts of or tries of the opposition party to be unique in regard or in their let's say main goal to replace the government, and it was really let's say pretty unsuccessful, and they couldn't agree between themselves on some issues. And I would say that it is natural, having in mind their ideology, the difference in their ideology and their programs. So as Jovana mentioned, in our opposition we have these civic parties in the opposition, and the radical and nationally colored ones, pro-Serbian parties. And it's very let's say hard to see them cooperate if they don't agree on the main issues. If they consider as the main factor to replace the government and put DPS on the opposition side, I believe that this interest could be a factor of their, let's say, common ground. But on the other side, we can also not forget the SDP, the party who is, let's say, acting at the moment from the opposition part, but they were for a certain period of time together with DPS in the government. So this is a party which split on a part which is now in opposition and part which stayed into a ruling coalition, SD. So I believe that we cannot also underestimate their results of this election. It could be also interesting to see whether they will stick to the opposition side and program, or again negotiate with the ruling coalition. Although all these parties which we mentioned, which are civic oriented towards EU and pro-Western countries, they still, let's say, do not have such strong support of the voters in Montenegro. But on the other side, their outcome of their decisions could simply influence and make the difference between these two scenarios.
Okay. Just a quick view to our audience. Just that you know, the Alliance for the Future, there are several parties within. One of them is affiliated to the European Conservatives and Reformists, and for the Alliance, Peace is Our Nation. One party is affiliated to the European People's Party. Just you have an orientation.
Just
the next topic. Sorry?
Just to add that the URA is also associated with the Greens.
With the Greens. So
yes,
you see a huge variety that we can witness here. Thank you. For now, I would like to jump on to the next topic, and this is the new law for religious freedom, and also the perspective of a kind of identity building in Montenegro. As Montenegro is one multi-ethnical state, it's quite an interesting thing, also from an Austrian and German perspective, to see how identity establishing is working there. Mr. Schäfer, I'll start with you. You have mentioned the law of freedom of religion before. Could you give us a little input? What does it mean? Also, in the perspective of the separation from Serbia, the Serbian Orthodox Church.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, and as far as I'm by no means an authority when it comes to religion, but the outrage that was sparked, the demonstration that was sparked, is that this will be a challenge to trace back that the Serbian Orthodox Church has owned property before Montenegro became a part of the Kingdom of Serbia and Croatia. So it seems to be that this would be a support for the newly funded Montenegrin Orthodox Church, and at the moment, I mean, I can, if I want to bring a bit of optimism into this election, sometimes you see chances for change that is sparked from something that you would not have foreseen before. And I think that with all the institutional power and with all the grip that Đukanović and the DPS has on the country, they might have been too naive when it came to adopting this law. And we can see the results here. The major challenge, and we have seen this from colored revolutions and democratic revolutions over the past decades, is one, you can have several triggering events, and I certainly think that this law could have been a triggering event, but the major challenge, and that brings us back to the things that we've talked about before, is that if the democratic revolution, democratic regime change has been successful in the past decades, one of the most important factors has been a united opposition. They might break up afterwards. They might have different political agenda afterwards, and this will not necessarily lead to a smooth democratic transition afterwards, as we have witnessed in the neighboring country. Serbia, for instance, but nevertheless, there needs to be a united opposition. And I'm not sure if the religious factor can bring, can be this uniting factor. And 3 days before the election, I don't think this is going to be praised.
So maybe a little bit naive, and the religious factor not as uniting thing. Melina, what is your perspective?
Actually, it's this religion issue, or at least let's say the law on freedom of religion, should be, by my personal opinion, something which should be done at least 10 years ago. So after the referendum on independence in 2006, there was a certain period of time where the position for, let's say, closing all these national interests issues should be finished and cleared out. And I think that the momentum of adopting this law is one of the mistakes of the ruling coalition or DPS or government of the government, because we cannot, excuse me, we cannot think about of this issue as the only freedom of religion, as the human right. It is a political issue, and it's really connected to, let's say, Serbs in Montenegro. So it is not so, the distinction is not so sharp that we can claim that all the people who are believers of the Serbian Orthodox Church are supporters of DF or pro-Serbian political stream. So it's not so clear, and it's not so easy, even if we have during these protests in the past months a lot of people who declared themselves as supporters and voters of DPS, but they are very bold in their attitudes towards protecting interests of Serbian Orthodox Church. And this really also influenced the decrease of support to DPS. So these national issues are on the, let's say, colored the whole election campaigns, not only for these elections, but all the previous ones. So I'm a little bit disappointed in our opposition that we always have that national issue as an excuse not to talk about program and some kind of alternative in governing. So we couldn't hear so much about alternatives, with also exception of URA, who is also pointing out weaknesses of DPS, and on the other side, not underestimating the program and giving solution. So this is a rare case in our election history and election campaigns. We are all the time talking about Serbs, Montenegrins, Albanians, and all other ethnical groups, and simply underestimating the importance of crucial issues like economical issues, standards, rule of law, human rights, freedom of speech. So somehow it always is in the background. And now again on this debate, again we are talking about these issues which should be like something less important. So we are catching ourselves all the time on these catchy issues like national interest, protecting national interest, and church issue in Montenegro is one of these like teasers. And I cannot say, I could say that this church issue started electoral campaign even in December last year. So everything in our broader public was colored by negotiation between Serbian Orthodox Church and the ruling DPS and the government. So this is not a scenario that I could imagine for Montenegro in 2020. Simply, I was expecting from ruling party after the referendum, mostly one mandate, 4 years, that this story could get the closure, but political influence, influence on our actual politic from the Serbian Orthodox Church is only growing. So we are conducting political research each year, twice a year, meaning that the trust of our citizens into institution, measuring that trust, the Serbian Orthodox Church is always on the top when we compare the trust in institutions. It's always the trust in a Serbian Orthodox Church is always higher percentage than government, president, whichever institution, even foreign institutions or judiciary system or parliament. So this is not something which can be a signal for developing or improvement of democratic standards. And now we are in one little bit absurd situation where we are comparing church to political party. For me, it's a really absurd situation.
So the influence of the Serbian Orthodox Church is growing. Jovana, how much influence do you rate for the democratic front by the Orthodox Church?
Milena said that it wasn't the right time for this law, but this law was actually in December adopted with intention to further divide people in Montenegro, because that's the manner of ruling of the DPS from the very beginning, targeting the enemies outside and inside and outside. So they actually wanted to adopt this law over the night without any kind of compromise or consensus or anything. That's the first thing. The second thing, as Milena said, is that some of the supporters or the members of the ruling party are also supporters of the Serbian Orthodox Church. According to the last census, which was 9 years ago, around 72% of the population are, believers or they are supporters of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and vast majority of them are supporting Serbian Orthodox Church. Montenegrin Orthodox Church does not have huge support among population. So let's say that because of that fact, the whole outcome of the elections will be interesting. And when it comes to the democratic front and their connection between with the Serbian Orthodox Church, they wanted from the very beginning to be organizers of the processions and the protests and everything, but Serbian Orthodox Church didn't want to involve them. But now, during the campaign, they are like, they're together in this. So I cannot divide the DF and there is no line between the Serbian Orthodox Church and the DF at the moment. There was like interesting question from the local journalist to local, let's say, former mayor of municipality of Budva, even though there was huge controversies regarding, the whole replacement and the political corruption in Budva. And she asked him, what is the policy of the DF if you are not talking about the language, about the church, and about the symbols of the country? So it's kind of, the whole campaign is about identity issues, which is something which is not like base for reforms and for our, democratization.
When we talk, when we look at the DPS again, could also the DPS probably lose voters due to this issue at the election?
Yes, but that's this difference of 6%. Even we are, you know, comparing results of the public opinion polls now or prior to the elections in 2016, and that's because of this, you know, issue, and that's because the people, you know, are strongly connected with the church.
Okay.
But if I may add something to this, I strongly believe that the supporters of previous supporters of DPS, who are, let's say, gave up of support to them because of the church issue, I'm not sure that they would now go to the side of Democratic Front. I would rather say that they would choose to be abstinent on these elections, or because I think that ideologically the difference between these two political fractions is too big, and that only they are disappointed in their decision regarding the church. I'm not sure that they would simply go on the other side. Let's say middle options like some civic approach, or on the other side be the abstinent on the next elections. So I'm not sure that this part of the support could be now on the side of the F coalition.
And that is also because of the understanding that the elections are, you know, like new referendum for the state independence, and that's something which is, you know, like presented by the ruling party, that we are again voting whether we are for the state union or any kind of state with Serbia, or are we for the independent state. And that's because, you know, the DPS voters will be somewhere between two blocks, those who are supporting Serbian Orthodox Church.
All right. Turning to the question of democracy in Montenegro, the Freedom House, one Freedom House study called Montenegro a hybrid regime. When we talk about the negotiations with the European Union, what does this mean?
That means that we are recording serious democratic setbacks in the negotiation process, even though we are negotiating for 8 years now for the EU membership. We are progressing in technical sense since all negotiating chapters are open at the moment. As you know, Montenegro accepted the new methodology and enlargement methodology in May, but it's still, we are still waiting to see what this new methodology, new approach will look like in practice. Because as I said, Montenegro opened all the negotiating chapters, so it means that basically we should open all 6 clusters according to new approach, you know, at once and now. But the main issue is that we are not progressing regarding the rule of law in chapters 23 and 24, and they are preconditions for, you know, progress in the negotiation process. The first reason why we have problems and issues regarding democracy and rule of law in the country is the first and the main one, that the same people are implementing reforms and they are the main cause of the problems. The second one is that somehow the EU approach is not that, you know, active, and they are not active in monitoring and providing some kind of guidelines how to strengthen democracy in the countries. That's why I strongly believe in this new approach with incentives and with sanctions if there are no results regarding the rule of law. And then the third thing is that the citizens in Montenegro do not believe in democracy and rule of law in the country. In accordance with our recent public opinion poll, 70% of Montenegrin citizens do not believe that the law is equally applied to all in Montenegro. So the one of the main issues is that institutions are deeply politicized, that there is strong political pressure over the work of the prosecution. Even now during the campaign, you know, the Agency for Prevention of Corruption is not reacting, you know, properly when there are some allegations or some, you know, like news or announcements about irregularities during the campaign. So there is no line between the party and the state in Montenegro, and that's why our democracy is stagnating.
Allow me to add for the audience that Đukanović is a member of the working group for Chapter 23 for fundamental rights within the Montenegrin Association negotiation for the European membership. So thank you very much. Before I jump to Ms. Besic, I would like to switch the perspective. Mr. Schäfer, maybe not all of you know, has graduated in writing his master thesis about the Stability and Association Agreement between the European Union and the Western Balkan states, so you know his developments for a decade. What is your perspective on this topic, on the some say lack of democracy within the negotiation process?
Thank you. I mean, that was more than a decade ago. It was actually within the process when Serbia and Montenegro split up. I was looking at the process and the approach of the European Union with this twin track that you would, on the one hand side, try to prevent an independent Montenegro, and on the other hand side, not prevent the European path of Montenegro, because at that time Serbia was not complying fully with the ICJ in The Hague, and then the situation was that Serbia, of course, had all the institutions, had the advantages, and this has turned in the last years. And this is why Montenegro is now the front runner. I was talking to someone from the European Commission back then, and then he compared this to a race between the tortoise and the hare. At that time, Montenegro being the tortoise. I'm not sure if this analogy, this fable, works anymore. In any case, the challenge that we are facing. From a point of view that we want to foster European integration, and that we want to have to fulfill the promise that has been given during the summit in Thessaloniki in 2003 to all Western Balkan countries when they fulfill the criteria that they can become a member. It's on the one hand side, 17 years is a lot of time, and even if we look at the negotiation process with Montenegro, we've already almost a decade again that has passed, and this is on the one hand side a challenge that the European Union has, especially in the recent years, had different priorities than enlargement. On the other hand side, also it's a two-way street, and the Montenegro has drastic setbacks in certain aspects before they are able to fulfill the Copenhagen criteria. And I'm not sure if it's actually something that can make a difference if we negotiate the 35 or 33 that have to be negotiated, or if we put them together in those clusters. We will have to see the effect that comes out of this, because one thing is certain: the closer you get to a potential membership, the stronger the observation and evaluation of the fulfillment of the criteria is going to be. And especially when it comes to those points, rule of law, independence of the judiciary, but also freedom of speech, and especially when we look at journalists. This is, we are facing a reality where Montenegro is not fulfilling this to a not even satisfactory level. And this will be a major challenge, but without a clear opposition, powerful opposition that would advocate towards this direction. The biggest opposition party will certainly not push for closer EU integration. There will not be any possible change in the European Union, and we need to stress this. And when we say European Union, it's always the member states. The European Union in this process, of course, the Commission screens, the Commission reports, but the member states themselves, as a foreign policy actor, need to push much stronger, but they are relying on the fact that the DPS will provide stability. This is why we call this also a stabilicracy in the region, this is very comfortable to relax on the fact that not much is changing, because on the one hand side, the stability in the country and the region is given. On the other hand side, you also do not have to let them become a member of the European Union because they don't fulfill the criteria. I'm stressing that this is not the general notion of the European Union, it's not the general notion of the member states, but this is a trap that they are in, and if the member states do not really step up their promises that they have made towards the society in the Western Balkans, not the governments, the society, then we will face drastic developments in the region that will have drastic repercussions for the future of European integration.
Exactly. You don't only need democratic institutions for democracy, you need the Democrats. So the closer you get to the European Union, the more observation you have. And Montenegro now is not fulfilling them. Milena.
Yes.
The European integration, is it a topic at the election?
So this topic is always, let's say, used in electoral campaign, on mainly and mostly on the side of ruling coalition, meaning that they describe themselves as the only ones who could simply keep us on the EU integration road and bring us into European Union. On the other side, the opposition parties are presented by DPS as the ones who are going to, let's say, take us back from that road and turns Montenegro towards Eastern countries' influence. What is actually, let's say, going on there is that we see, as a result of these campaigns, and not only these campaigns, but rhetorics in our public, is that we have certain degrees of support to European Union integration of Montenegro from our citizens. The factors for decrease of trust in EU is not lying only on our side in domestic, let's say, political life, but also there is not, let's say, as you already, as Mr. Schäfer mentioned, there is not, let's say, clear, unique message from all member states. So the message from Brussels is, let's say, supporting enlargement, at least officially, but on the other side, we cannot hear these clear messages from all EU countries. On the other side, examples of Croatia, for example, could be to our citizens one, let's say, kind of a message that may be wrote to European Union itself, will not improve the standards or democratic standards or economic standards. But on the other side, the main issue there is that you said it's the two-way road. Exactly, it's the two-way road, and we have to concentrate on our side, where we simply, it's not enough to bureaucratically or technically open all the chapters, adopt all the laws and legislation, but the part which is more important is implementation. So implementation of all this depends on political will of the government to, let's say, free our institutions from the political influence. So we need to have, our citizens need to have trust in institutions, at the first place in our judiciary system, in prosecution, and simply to see that kind of, yes, I mentioned political will to deal with the main issues that are bothering our society, such as equal applying of laws and equal interpretation of certain even constitutional constitution itself. So if we leave our public to in this stage of let's say very low trust in institutions, EU cannot help us. So the main issue is to have these improvements on the ground, on the field, and then we can let's say think about the attitude and opinion of European Union itself or its members. When we talk about the level of democracy, and you mentioned, I have to point out this, let's say, certain suppression of freedom of speech in Montenegro that we see in a recent period of time, even more. It's not only towards media, but we can see that this situation of pandemia and epidemia of COVID virus in Montenegro, like gave more courage to our police and state institutions to arrest citizens for public opinions on their public opinions stated on social networks even. So we see that, let's say, these democratic standards are going in the quite opposite direction, and here is why this concern is very, let's say, visible. And I don't think that only entering the European Union will solve our issues. I believe that it's very important and crucial to deal with that and to have this political will.
Milena, sorry.
In 24.
You're back again. Perfect. Could you just maybe repeat the last sentence as it's stuck a little bit?
Maybe I only again underline the same, that it's more important to raise democratic standards and to implement the laws and simply get back the trust of citizens in institutions and make public institutions free from political influence. Then the path towards European Union will be something which will come naturally. But it's more important to have that, let's say, on the ground functioning instead of ticking the chapters.
Thank you. So it's all about implementation. Johannes, sorry, Sebastian, Jovana, do you like to add something? Otherwise, I would switch to the next. Ms. Marovic.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, the main issue is that actually the only progress during the negotiation process was regarding the adoption of the laws and other regulations, and we are successful in that sense because we are a small country, small administration, and the whole acquis and everything, it's really challenging task. But actually, the whole process is so long at the moment, you know, like 8 years, and we are even going backwards in the sense of the legislative solutions and everything, and especially those rights which are really the most important to the citizens. For example, freedom of information, as Milena said, also freedom of speech and everything. So we are going backwards even regarding these legislative solutions and the framework for democratization. And when it comes to implementation and the real impact of the reforms on the ground, there is no any kind of impact, because we have same issues regarding the independence of the institutions as we had 8 years ago. So there is a progress regarding the transparency and the improvement of the procedures, but on the ground there is no progress at all.
Then I would ask one last question, and then feel free to ask some questions after the last question. So we spoke about a lot of different topics. My last question is regarding the election. The absence of tourism in Montenegro with the beautiful Adriatic coast, is the absence of tourism an important topic at the election? And so on the economic situation. Milena, maybe?
It's interesting that you ask that, because all the time the politics are, let's say, on the first page of each agenda. On the other side, the things that we need to, let's say, focus on are our economic status. And it's interesting that you mentioned tourism, as in our government, the tourism is the main branch that our whole economy relies on. And simply when something unpredictable, such as this pandemic situation, of course, you then lost everything from your hands. Everything is out of your control, and simply maybe I will be a little bit sarcastic, but the only thing that you can do is to pray to God. So maybe this is the reason why we so much but having this church issue in our agenda. I'm joking, of course, but it's really difficult situation, having in mind that the let's say main branch of economy that we rely on, and that we have so high debt by GDP in our country already, and that we have so large administration, so state administration, and high percentage of unemployment in Montenegro. Economical situation in Montenegro is quite difficult anyway, but especially I'm afraid that we will face serious problems in the upcoming years, having in mind that we really relied too much on tourism. Not to mention the type of tourism, and I think it's now not the right moment to discuss so much in details about the way how even this branch is organized, and what is the strategy towards let's say collecting and increasing our budget. I think that we will be really affected not only for this season, but really affected for a longer period of time by this, let's say, strategic approach. If the strategic approach for our economy was to rely only on one branch.
Mrs. Marovic?
As Milena said, the situation regarding economy in Montenegro, it is complicated even without the coronavirus and situation about tourism sector and everything. And this is mainly because of the Bar-Boljare, the motorway, highway, which is built by Chinese, and our public debt is around 80% at the moment, and with, you know, like some calculations that it will be even around 90% by the end of the year. So it is really complicated even without this whole situation, where the economies in the EU and around the world are, you know, somehow damaged because of the crisis.
All right. Thank you so much. We already have 2 questions. Maybe start with you. Please take the microphone and maybe introduce yourself. That would be
thank you very much. First of all, what that was very interesting for me, what the speakers from Montenegro said. Perhaps I have to add that I was the German ambassador to Montenegro until 2016. I speak the language, so I think I had a good insight in what is happening in the country. And I would like, because it's really very important, to add 2 things. First of all, the DPS is a direct follower party of the Socialist Party that ruled in Yugoslavia over decades, the only party. So they had an infrastructure which they could, party infrastructure which they could take over and which they still have. They have more than 100,000 members. So only this membership guarantees them always to be the strongest party. Even if many members may not vote for them, still in a country of 620,000, you can simply calculate. Yeah? And there were again and again opposition parties. I think of the Liberal Party in the 90s, for instance, SNP, which became quite strong. It's very important to say this. And DPS, as my partners in Montenegro say, I'm now an activist in nature conservation in Montenegro, say was always able to split it. And now to the role of now the new coalition based on the democratic front, for the future of Montenegro, is there not a great danger that this party is also, at least partially, manipulated with its very radical stance towards the extreme reactionary, homophobe, anti-democratic Serbian Orthodox Church is not used to split the opposition again. So after the elections, even if the opposition may a little bit have more votes than the DPS and its coalition partners, it will be not possible for the overall opposition, the pro-European, pro-democratic, smaller parties, and
sorry, just please speak in the microphone.
Yes, my question,
could you hear everything?
My question is that could the DPF not be a Trojan horse? Could DF or the Coalition for the Future at least in part be a Trojan horse in order to again split the opposition so that after the elections DPS has continued to rule as the most likely strongest party?
Okay, thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Gerhard Machel. I'm representing the Karl-Renner-Institut, one of the organizing institutions. We heard much about the deficits in the country, also when it comes to fundamental rights. One thing is quite interesting in this regard. 2 months ago, the parliament voted a law legalizing same-sex civic partnerships. How come this quite unique law in the region? And can the DPS be regarded as advocate for equality when it comes to LGBTIQ, but also when it comes to equality between men and women? Is it the Liberal Party in that sense? Or is this was this only a maneuver in order to please European partners? And what can be expected from the opposition in this regard? The previous speaker already said that one party can be regarded as homophobe. Yeah. How do you assess that law and the future when it comes to equality, LGBTIQ, but also men and women?
We take a third question.
Thank you very much. My name is Stefanie Fenkert. I'm the director at the International Institute for Peace. And my question relates to the regional cooperation. I mean, Montenegro is a very, very small country, and we heard about this idea, which came up, I don't know, several years ago about a mini Schengen, which could also be like part of bringing the region a little bit closer together in order to foster cooperation between the countries. We know about the past in the region, we know about nationalism, and also about how difficult the relation between the respective countries still are at one point. So how do you see the regional cooperation ongoing? Like, what is Montenegro's stance in this? Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe I repeat the 3 questions. The last one was regarding the regional cooperation. The second one was regarding the new law on same-sex partnership. And if the DPS was an advocate for it, it can be seen as liberal in societal topics, if I interpreted it correct. And the first question from the former German ambassador to Montenegro was regarding coalition forming and especially the DP. The DF, sorry. The DF, of course.
So I'll.
Your microphone, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll start. For the first question, you know, our opposition is always trying to build pre-election coalition, and that was the case even before these elections. And the situation is always that DF has some precondition even before sitting to the table. So they want to influence even these, like, let's say, discussions about coalition with the identity issues, with the language, with the church, with the everything. So I'm expecting that they will do the same if there will be situation regarding the post-election coalition between the opposition, and also this civic coalition with URA. They are strictly for the expert government and for the coalition with the members from the, let's say, expert community. So it will be really, really hard and challenging to reach the agreement after the election. And I am expecting that the DEF will somehow, you know, try to influence the situation with their priorities. For the second issue, the law on same-sex partnership or marriage, and there was, you know, this law was once in the parliament, and it wasn't adopted, and that was like during the last year. And with this adoption during this year or 2 months ago or something, I think that the ruling party wanted to shift attention from the law on religions or on religion freedom, and that's true that the DEF is against this law, and that they will probably challenge this law if there will be. But we are all hoping for the broad coalition with some kind of check and balances, you know, between the parties and between the branches. So we are hoping that there will be, you know, like people which will be smart in that huge coalition after the election. And for the third question, Montenegro is, as you said, the small country, and the country without bilateral disputes with the neighbors. And there is this issue regarding Prevlaka with Croatia or something, but that's not on the table now. So it is really a country which is active in all regional initiatives, and it is pushing for the, let's say, commitments within the Berlin process. But, you know, regional cooperation is something which is and was forced by the EU and the other, you know, international actors. And it is something which should be forced by, you know, countries in the region and not otherwise. And also the Berlin process and the regional cooperation is at the moment influenced by the perspective of the EU membership. And that's something which is not good for the regional cooperation.
Okay, let me just add something on this, what Johanna said. I don't want to repeat because I agree with her. Mostly only will add on all three questions something. So yes, I cannot agree more that our opposition is very deeply divided. And of course, that goes into favor of the government and ruling opposition all the time. So all the blame, it's not only on the DPS and government side. We can also blame the opposition, which is not, let's say, improved enough for 30 years to find common ground and to find enough consensus to function and to make certain agreement on certain platform for a certain period of time, and then to develop it with their, let's say, separate interests afterwards. But all the time having that imperative of power. For example, if DF coalition has the most power among all other opposition parties, they have their strict demands and putting them all the time on the table. This is sometimes even the issue of not adopting some very important things in parliament, for example. We had this situation with changing of election legislation, and when one opposition party didn't want to participate because of the reason of law on freedom of religion, which doesn't have to do anything with the elections. And it's very hard to find compromise and consensus, common ground for some issues which are of general interest, not interest of each party separately. So of course, this is all goes into favor of ruling party. On the other side, the second question is the partnership and law on partnership on LGBTIQ population, and this is something I'm very proud of. This law coming that I'm coming from a non-governmental organization dealing with human rights. But as you mentioned, that part of the opposition parties are, let's say, against, and they are, let's say, more radical, right-handed, or the parties who do not support this kind of laws. This is not only case with the DF. We have also small national minority parties who are, let's say, also more pretty conservative. And I'm not sure that, let's say, if that this law could be one that could be on the table for taking back. On the other side, the third issue is yes, regional cooperation. If we have to put something on the plus side of DPS and the ruling coalition, is that foreign policy. Foreign policy considering also the regional cooperation. Because as Jovana mentioned, there's always, let's say, good bilateral relations, and this is something which I think also gave to Montenegro this mark of front runner in the region, because as she mentioned, of course, it is also influenced by EU and Berlin process itself as the requirement, but let's say that the Montenegro is a country that can sit on the bilateral level for the table with all the neighboring countries. So this is something which we can, let's say, put on the positive and plus side of this government.
I will just very briefly add to the very elaborate answer that has already been provided. Question, very good question, but I don't think I have or not, so I'm gonna say nothing to that. Is the DPS a liberal party? I would say it's an opportunistic party, and the reasons for this have been given by both Jovana and Milena when it comes to policy making from the governing party. Third question, I would, by the nature of my job that deals with regional cooperation, answer in a bit longer way. I have been a very big advocate decade ago of trying to find regional cooperation, especially in the Western Balkans first, before you can then integrate closer into the European Union. Same also, I deal with the Eastern Partnership countries, and sorry? Yeah, maybe let me finish, and then you can ask again a question. Same goes for the Eastern Partnership. Now, when we compare what, for instance, CEFTA has brought, which is a combination of Western Balkans and one Eastern Partnership country, I have become very skeptical. And as much as I would say, yeah, mini Schengen, fantastic, but why are we advocating something that has been the norm until 1990? I mean, traveling between those countries, when you now come from Skopje to Ljubljana and you need to cross like 5 borders, you're treated differently on whether you cross a Schengen outside border or not. And this is shifting, and that creates diversion, and that creates in and out of the club. So yeah, absolutely sectoral regional cooperation might enhance a less divisive integration into the EU, because it might not only put the clusters of the enlargement process within the evaluation of the chapters, but also maybe clusters of countries that could then join. But on the other hand side, economic regional integration doesn't seem to function very well from my assessment, and mini Schengen would be something that simply brings back what has more or less already been there in the region, as sad as it is.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Then I would ask you also for a short answer, and of course, if you feel there is one aspect that is lacking until now, please feel free to put it into your closing statement. So, the lady in the back.
Thank you. We talked a bit about regional cooperation and had a bit of a perspective on how relations of Montenegro and the European Union are currently, well, more or less existent. Let me ask about a different area of the world. There is this huge credit project with China, mostly invested in road infrastructure improvement. So I wonder, how are the relations of Montenegro to China? Is this seen differently between the different parties? Is it a political question in the end that is part of the electoral discussion? Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go. Well, regarding the Chinese interest in Montenegro and the construction of the highway, actually, there was a recent public opinion poll in which was conducted by a political network, and then the citizens of Montenegro, they see the benefits of the highway, but they are not sure whether this the whole project is actually stable. And this whole situation regarding the Chinese influence is something which is at the moment like at the economic sphere, but there are chances that they should be connected with the political influence and political sphere, because the contract on the highway is not public, and there are calculations that if the government is not able to pay the loan, that the Chinese company can take whatever they want of our resources. So that's the one side of the story. If the opposition is involved in the whole question and the whole project regarding the highway, they're always criticizing the government and the DPS policy because of the lack of transparency, because of the government was not able to define conditions of the project properly, because of the huge public debt and everything. But there is no, like, you know, the story behind the story, what is about the Chinese influence in Montenegro and in the Western Balkans. And as far as I'm informed, I'm not sure that this topic is present during the election campaign. Of course, the ruling party is using the highway as their, you know, like, clear sign of their progress, and you know, they said that this is the project of the century in Montenegro, because they actually they invited Chinese to build the highway and everything. And the truth is that actually 2 previous tenders failed, that they were forced to somehow have a deal, to conclude a deal with the Chinese company.
All right. So one can say that Beijing's financial partnering with Podgorica will burden the Montenegrin economy for years, maybe for decades. As our time is over, and you can see there is a huge interest in Montenegrin politics. I would ask you, Mr. Šefab, maybe for a closing statement for today's session.
Maybe we have the possibility for Milena also to say one last.
Thank you for the possibility, but I don't have anything to add. I completely agree with Jovana and wouldn't take more of your time. Thank you.
Jovana, of course, you have also the floor.
No, I just like regarding the outcome of the elections in Montenegro. I think that the most important thing that in Montenegro is still uneven playing field between opposition and the ruling party, and that's something which is the most dominant factor regarding the results and the elections. And we will see what will be the dynamics. But as I said, I'm not optimistic regarding the change in Montenegro, and this change will not happen over the night.
Yeah, I think, and that connects to the question about China. It's very intransparent. It's very unclear what the results would be, but it's quick and it provides political capital that will run out very quickly. But we can see that there is, in general, a very tendency towards the small attention span in political discourses. And in European integration takes time, but it doesn't help when it comes from time to time on the agenda and then is not thought through and pushed through until the end. Which is a pity for the region, which is a pity for the European integration process itself, because there has been a promise. Of course, you have to fulfill criteria. Of course, you have to be eager and also to want to adhere to European values. Although this is a question in itself that we might have to ask ourselves. How values are treated within the European Union, but that leads us away from today's topic. So I would just say we want to be optimistic, which means that realistically the political government in Montenegro is not going to change, but this will also mean that the country stays on the track of European integration, and we hope that then the closer the country gets, the better the influence from the side of the European Union member states and also from the European Commission will be on the DPS, will be on Đukanović. That will not prevent the society of Montenegro, which is far more than just the DPS, to become sooner or later a member of the European Union. I would like to say thank you very much for both Jovana and Milena for joining us virtually. We would have loved to have you physically here, but at the moment it's not only the European integration that is facing obstacles, but also not something that the mini Schengen or Schengen integration would be able to solve. We hope that we have the possibility to meet in person in the future, maybe talk about the outcomes of the election when the situation is a bit better with regards to the COVID pandemic. I'm very glad that we have had this experience with this hybrid, not regime, but event, where we have the possibility to at least see some people in person. I think it has functioned very well, but I would like to ask you what you thought about this. So if you have the time after the discussion, please come and tell me your opinion if this makes sense to continue it in that way. And then, of course, I would like to say thank you to Michael Stellberg, who has moderated the discussion, and our two partners from the Politische Akademie and the Renner-Institut for continuously supporting information about the elections in the target countries of IDM. Thank you very much, and I hope to be able to see you very soon in person somewhere online. Follow our activities, follow our social media channels that you find over here, and let's keep in touch.